I'm a cancer doctor, and I often suggest to my patients that they consider marijuana for their loss of appetite, nausea, pain, depression, and insomnia. It's one medicine they could use instead of 5.
Critics of medical marijuana are highly skeptical of claims it can treat just about everything. How is it possible that one plant has the potential to treat so many different ailments? Intriguing answers started appearing in the early 90s when researchers pinpointed receptors in the brain and the body that bind with the cannabinoids. Receptors can be described as locks on the surface of a cell, and when the correct key binds with the correct lock or receptor, it opens the door and delivers messages. Sometimes the message is that the body is feeling pain. Other times the message may be that there's an invader and the immune system must attack.
Scientists located 2 receptors, cannabinoid receptors, one called the CB1 receptor, mainly in the brain, and the other is the CB2 receptor, which is mainly in cells of the immune system.
The CB1 receptors are extremely abundant in the brain, but they're also found all over the body in the major organs, the heart, the liver, kidneys, and pancreas. After finding all these locks that accepted the cannabis key, researchers made the next big discovery. The human body makes its own cannabinoids, called endocannabinoids.
We have this whole elaborate system where we have these receptors in our brain and in our immune system, and these circulating chemicals that we produce ourselves that really are very, very similar to the chemicals in the marijuana plant.
The only difference is that the endocannabinoids that we produce are in such small quantities, and they're also rapidly degraded, so that therefore we are not high all the time, or we don't have that feeling of euphoria all the time.
Dr. Prakash Nayagarkati is a professor of pathology and microbiology at the University of South Carolina. For the last decade, he's been doing research on what's become known as the human endocannabinoid system.
The precise functions of the endocannabinoid system is still being understood, actually.
The discovery of the system, however, is already revealing clues that have bolstered the personal stories of relief. The areas of the brain that control nausea and vomiting, chronic pain, and epileptic seizures all have cannabinoid receptors.
What do these things do? Well, in the brain and the nervous system, the cannabinoid system seems to exert kind of a dampening effect. It's kind of an internal, I like to think of it as a neurological shock absorber.
And when they looked in other animals, they found these receptors were present in basically all animal species. So why do dogs and monkeys, for example, need to have cannabinoid receptors?
They must be playing a very critical role in trying to maintain some of the physiological functions.
The whole development of the fact that there are cannabinoid receptors in endocannabinoids has really given drug companies and pharmaceutical investigators a lot of opportunity to try to manipulate the body's own cannabinoid system.
That's because now they can create synthetic drugs that target the receptors instead of taking chemicals from the plant. By avoiding the plant, they get around the controversies and complications of its Schedule I status. A search of the U.S. patent database reveals numerous large pharmaceutical companies have filed recent patents claiming their cannabinoid receptor drug has the potential to treat almost everything: multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, rheumatoid arthritis, Tourette's, epilepsy, heart disease, obesity, various mental illnesses, and the holy grail of medicine, a cancer cure.
It's been a medicine for about 3,000 years now. It only hasn't been a medicine in this country for 68 years. I say in the scheme of things, it's been a medicine a whole lot longer than it hasn't been.
Dr. Donald Abrams is a professor of clinical medicine at the University of California, San Francisco, and an oncology physician at San Francisco General Hospital. He says doctors were able to freely prescribe cannabis for various ailments up until 1937.
Harry Anslinger, who was a prohibitionist and the first head of the Federal Narcotics Bureau, decided to introduce the so-called Marijuana Tax Act. Physicians in the United States knew the medicine as cannabis, and by using marijuana, he sort of did an end run around the medical community.
The act imposed a high tax on medical marijuana and such onerous registration and reporting requirements that it effectively banned its use as a medicine altogether. The American Medical Association came out in opposition to the act, with Dr. William C. Woodward testifying there was no evidence the medical use of cannabis was causing addiction, and that there are evident potentialities in the drug that should not be shut off by adverse legislation. He opined that it's impossible to foresee how much the new regulations will deprive the public of the benefits of a drug that, on further research, may prove to be of substantial value. The Marijuana Tax Act delivered the final blow to a medicine that was already being replaced by the opiates and aspirin. Cannabis was removed from the U.S. Pharmacopoeia in 1942. According to a 1982 United States Institute of Medicine report, Marijuana and Health, the preliminary research coupled with anecdotal evidence warranted a closer look at medicinal cannabis. The report also found that marijuana attacks diseases and symptoms differently than other drugs. This offered the tantalizing possibility for drug companies to develop new, novel drugs out of the chemicals in the marijuana plant. The Institute of Medicine called for more research on these chemicals, known as cannabinoids. Even with this encouragement, research on cannabis failed to flower.
There aren't many scientists or clinical investigators who are particularly interested in doing research in medical marijuana because it's such a hassle.
Marijuana's Schedule I status means Dr. Abrams has to get approval from more than a half dozen regulatory bodies before he can start a cannabis medical trial.
There are so many roadblocks that you have to go through.
Marijuana is an illegal substance that I think a lot of investigators and even organizations just don't want to get involved in something that is so controversial.
The center's research was funded by a $9 million grant from California taxpayers. The money allowed for a few legitimate small marijuana trials, including several done by Dr. Abrams, that confirmed what Rosenfeld was saying all along, that cannabis works on pain, especially pain that does not respond to opiates.
All of them, to some extent or another, demonstrated that smoked marijuana is effective in this situation for which we really don't have very good treatments.
I can say that the cannabinoids are almost certain to be useful in neuropathic pain based on the research that we've done.
But even when researchers get significant results like this, Dr. Abrams says cannabis research can still be an academic dead end.
When I submit it for publication, I have found what I perceive to be a publication bias, that people are not particularly interested in publishing data suggesting that marijuana might have some benefits. All of those things, I think, sort of dampen anybody's enthusiasm to take on medical marijuana research.
And scientists are not getting much help from pharmaceutical companies either.
No pharmaceutical company is interested in supporting, marijuana research.
Because it's a naturally occurring substance out in the world, so you can't patent it per se. So the research on it is quite dicey. It really is. Nobody can make any money on that research or on that development.
Even if drug companies created a novel marijuana plant drug that they could patent, doctors could not prescribe it.
It's going to be a class 1 type of drug. It's not going to be broadly used. And again, why do you want to spend a lot of time developing a drug that you can't really sell?
Why would a pharmaceutical company want to get involved with something like that? I think until marijuana is rescheduled, large-scale research will probably not occur.
Francis Young, I believe, was the DEA administrative judge who, my understanding was, basically suggested that it be made a Schedule II.
According to government documents, the DEA's administrative law judge, Francis Young, found there was incontrovertible evidence that cannabis was an effective medical treatment for nausea and appetite loss, multiple sclerosis, and spinal cord injury spasms. Judge Young ruled marijuana should be moved to Schedule II, writing, "The evidence in this record clearly shows that marijuana has been accepted as capable of relieving the distress of great numbers of very ill people. It would be unreasonable, arbitrary, and capricious for DEA to continue to stand between those sufferers and the benefits of this substance." For those who were concerned about marijuana's side effects, Young ruled that as a medicine under a doctor's supervision, marijuana in its natural form is one of the safest therapeutically active substances known to man.
Anyone who says that, we have adequate treatments for all of the conditions for which marijuana is purported to have some effect, I don't think that is a correct statement. I think the fact is that we have a lot of difficult to treat conditions, and there may be a niche or a place for the cannabinoids with some of those conditions.